The wind was always the first to arrive. It swept across the golden fields like a memory returning home, soft, untamed, full of whispers. In that small town nestled at the edge of nowhere, mornings came slowly and left even slower. The hills never changed. The trees never moved far from their place. And in a modest cottage perched alone at the edge of the prairie, a woman sat silently in her wheelchair, watching the world she no longer walked through. Margaret Greene had once danced. Not in dreams or quiet nostalgia, but on grand stages where every eye followed the movement of her body like a tide. Her limbs had once obeyed her like wind to a storm, fluid, commanding, alive. But now only her hands moved freely. Fingers that used to hold grace now clutched the metal arms of her chair, knuckles tight, veins showing through thin skin. The accident had stolen more than her ability to stand. It had taken rhythm from her soul. That final night on stage, lights, applause, the pirouette that turned into panic, the scream of brakes, the crash, the silence. Everything had collapsed into stillness. Everything except time. Her daughter, Elena, had begged her to move back into the city, to live closer to family, to accept help. But Margaret couldn't do it. Something about the busy hum of civilization grated against her now, reminded her too sharply of all that was lost. Instead she chose exile. The prairie. The wind. The wide open. Somewhere out here, she hoped, the silence might cradle her, not crush her. Mornings began the same. A slow shuffle from bed to chair. A worn robe. Black tea with a slice of lemon. Birds speaking to each other in the language of flight she could no longer understand. The distant lowing of cattle. The groan of old wood settling into old earth. And then one day something new. At first she thought it was a dream. The creature appeared at the edge of her vision, almost blended into the amber grass. A shape, dark and large, unmoving. She blinked. It remained. A horse. Alone. Watching. She squinted against the sunlight. No fence, no halter, no rider. Just wild and still, like a statue carved from wind and fire. Margaret sat frozen, her breath catching not out of fear but out of something older. Recognition, perhaps. Or awe. It was gone the next morning. And the next. But on the fourth day there it stood again. Closer this time. Just beyond the fence that bordered her back pasture. Its coat was the color of burnt chestnuts, and its mane fell in tangled knots like the edge of a thundercloud. Margaret didn't move. Didn't dare to. They watched each other for what felt like a lifetime. A breath passed. Then the horse turned and disappeared once more into the tall grass. She told no one. Not Elena, not the mailman, not the nurse who visited on Thursdays. It felt sacred, like a secret carved into the sky. But it kept returning. Each time it drew a little closer. Each time, Margaret's fingers curled a little looser on the arms of her chair. Her tea would sit cold on the table. Her thoughts no longer lingered on the ache in her joints, but on the creature's wild eyes, eyes that looked through her, not past her. By the second week she began to speak. Softly at first. Mostly to herself. "You don't belong here either, do you?" she said one morning, her voice rough with disuse. The horse didn't move. "I wonder if you ever ran away, or just kept going until no one followed." She found herself looking for him, because now she was certain it was a he, in every corner of the horizon. She read somewhere that Mustangs still roamed the American wilds, descendants of horses brought by conquistadors, bloodlines forged in endurance and rebellion. This one bore all of that. Untamed. Untouchable. Yet somehow he chose her porch as his horizon. The isolation didn't feel so sharp anymore. The air no longer sat heavy on her chest. When she wheeled herself outside in the morning, there was purpose again. Not the same as before, but purpose all the same. One evening the clouds turned violet and the wind carried a strange electricity. The air smelled like rain though the sky held no storm. Margaret rolled herself out to the edge of the porch just as the sun dipped behind the hills. And there he was, closer than ever. She held her breath. He stood at the gate, nostrils flaring, hooves shifting in the dry earth. Something pulsed between them, an invisible thread pulled tight across time and species and sorrow. He stepped forward. She could hear the thud of his hooves, the crunch of the grass. Her hands trembled. Her heart beat like a drum desperate to be heard. Her voice, long silent to anyone but the wind, rose unbidden. "It's okay," she whispered. "I won't hurt you." A foolish thing to say. What could she hurt anymore? But he paused, ears flicking forward. Another step. Now he was just beyond the porch. His head lowered, one eye fixed on her as though searching through decades of silence and disappointment. She felt exposed, naked without ever moving a muscle. And yet, seen. The wind swirled around them like a dance, low and rhythmic. Her eyes glistened. For the first time in years, tears escaped without bitterness. Not pain. Not grief. But something else. Wonder. Margaret reached slowly into the basket at her side and pulled out a single apple. Her hand shook, stretched as far as her reach allowed. The Mustang sniffed the air, stepped forward, then paused. For a moment nothing moved. Then he leaned in, teeth grazing her palm, pulling the apple gently from her hand. The warmth of his breath lingered. Margaret exhaled, the breath shaky, fragile. He turned then abruptly and galloped away, his mane catching the last flame of the sunset, his body a blur of muscle and myth. Gone. But the silence he left behind was not empty. She wheeled herself back inside in the dark. No lights turned on. Just her hand resting on her lap, tingling from the heat of another life. That night she didn't dream of the stage or the fall. She dreamed of hooves pounding across the plains and a woman moving again, not with her legs, but with light in her chest and rhythm in her breath. And when she woke, she wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. Because somewhere out there, in the wild that mirrored her soul, he was coming back. The Mustang returned with the sunrise. Margaret was already outside, a worn quilt wrapped over her shoulders, steam rising from the chipped mug balanced in her lap. The prairie shimmered beneath a thin veil of morning fog, golden stalks waving like dancers stretching before the music begins. And then from the mist he came, hooves striking the earth in slow, deliberate rhythm. He was not merely passing through. He was coming to her. He stopped just beyond the porch again, mane tousled by the breeze, his eyes fixed on her as if reading thoughts she hadn't spoken aloud. She had come to recognize the intelligence in that gaze. Not the dull-eyed obedience of domesticated horses, but something feral, ancient, knowing. He looked at her the way no person had in years, like she mattered. Margaret didn't speak this time. She simply held his gaze, letting the silence stretch and settle between them. She extended her hand, not with food but open and empty. An offering of trust. He didn't approach, but he didn't leave either. That was enough. The next morning she was there again. And the next. The visits became routine, not planned but expected. Like breath. Like sunrise. And each time the distance between them shrank. She began speaking to him as one would to an old friend, telling stories of the city, the stage, the stumbles and spotlights, the way applause once felt like thunder beneath her ribs. And he listened, or at least stood still, ears forward, head tilted. "You don't care about dance," she mused one afternoon. "But you understand movement, don't you? You live in it." The days passed and Margaret found herself moving more. Not walking, not yet, but moving. Her hands no longer trembled with stiffness. Her arms lifted with the grace of memory. She began practicing the old routines in the quiet of her bedroom. Seated. Measured. Small movements, yes, but filled with the old fire. She dusted off the portable speaker and played music again. Chopin, Strauss, the notes that once carried her across grand stages now whispering through her little home. One afternoon, while the record spun and twilight draped its soft blue over the horizon, the horse did something unexpected. Margaret had wheeled herself out farther than usual, to the middle of the field where the grass tickled the sides of her chair. He approached slowly, cautiously, as if unsure of this change in her. She held still, watching. And then, without warning, he rose on his hind legs. It was not a violent motion, not a rear of fear or aggression. It was deliberate, poetic. He lifted himself into the air like a flame-defying wind, his hooves pawing at the fading light, his neck arched, muscles taut beneath sunburnt skin. He held the pose for a breath. And in that moment he danced. Margaret gasped. It was not just movement. It was art. Untamed, unchoreographed, and breathtaking. The Mustang dropped back to the earth in a whisper of dust and breath. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes stung. "You," her voice broke. "You just showed me what I forgot." That night the tears came in waves. Not from sorrow but from something deeper, relief, perhaps. The rediscovery of something she'd buried long ago, wonder. The raw, aching beauty of a body in motion, not for spectacle, not for praise, but because it had to. The next morning she moved differently. Her arms no longer mirrored her pain but responded to the pulse of music within her. She no longer simply rolled into the field, she arrived. The land became her stage, the sky her curtain. She lifted her arms with elegance, her torso swayed in rhythm with the wind. And always, the horse watched. She called him Ash, because he reminded her of fire that had survived ruin. The color of embers still glowing beneath soot. The flicker of something not dead, only dormant. One evening, as shadows stretched long and the horizon burned with sunset, she played a waltz. Ash came without hesitation, as though summoned by the music. Margaret moved as she never had in the chair, shoulders fluid, arms painting invisible lines through air, head lifted with poise. Ash circled her, hooves light, tail swishing, occasionally tossing his head to the rhythm. It wasn't imagination anymore. It was a duet. She laughed, out loud fully. A sound she hadn't made in years. And then came the car. It pulled up fast, tires kicking dust, brakes grinding. The moment shattered. Elena. Margaret's daughter emerged from the vehicle in city shoes not meant for country soil, her face flushed with worry. She stood stunned for a moment, watching her mother and the massive horse just feet apart. Margaret froze. Ash did not bolt, but his ears flicked back, uncertain. "What are you doing?" Elena's voice trembled. "Mom, what is this?" Margaret lowered her arms slowly, her breath still caught in her chest. He's not dangerous." Elena stepped forward, her eyes darting between her mother and the Mustang. "You're out here alone with a wild animal? Are you out of your mind?" "I'm not alone," Margaret said quietly. Elena's face softened, but only slightly. "You're scaring me. This isn't safe. You've been out here. What, talking to horses? Dancing in a field? This isn't healing, Mom. This is denial." Margaret looked away. "You don't understand. I don't want you to get hurt again. And I don't want to keep feeling dead," Margaret snapped, her voice louder than she intended. Ash shifted, snorted. "Don't you see? I'm more alive out here than I've been in 10 years. Elena's eyes welled. She stepped back, shaken. "I just don't want to lose you." Margaret softened. "You already did a long time ago. But maybe I'm finding myself again. With him." There was silence. Elena looked toward Ash, who stood tall and calm, eyes steady. There was no fear in him now. Only presence. "I'll stay a few days," Elena said finally. "Just to make sure you're okay." Margaret nodded. She knew this was compromise, not surrender. That night, Margaret sat alone on the porch again. The stars glimmered coldly above. The wind was quieter than usual, as if waiting. Ash did not come. And yet Margaret smiled. Because for the first time she wasn't waiting for him to save her. She had remembered who she was. The woman who danced. And tomorrow she would rise with the sun, whether on wheels or not, and she would move to the rhythm of the prairie again. Because Ash had reminded her, the body may forget, but the soul never does.